Hello, and welcome to Language Arts and Math, an argument for subject matter integration. My name is Melissa Dunlap, and I am the Education and Workforce Development Program Manager at the ARM Institute. Located in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, the ARM Institute is a Department of Defense manufacturing institute with a specific focus on advanced manufacturing and robotics. Thank you for joining us. On the screen, you will see today's agenda. First, what are we going to be talking about today? I am here to make the case for subject integration, specifically the subjects of language arts and math. Second, how? How can this be done? Along with providing some data points supporting these efforts, I want to share a few examples that you can take back to your classroom and immediately put into practice. And finally, the why. Why is this so important? And how does it connect to today's in-demand jobs? As we begin, I wanted to start with a few questions to get your creative minds thinking about what we've all heard as classroom teachers and/or parents. First, we often hear our students or our kids say that they are either good at math or good at language arts. Keeping this idea in mind, why do we, and more importantly they, assume that the two are somehow disconnected? Is there really any truth to this idea? Where did this idea even come from? As classroom teachers, we often see our curriculum, whether it be language arts or math, as separate entities from other subjects. As a trained language arts teacher myself, I was often just concerned about my own classroom, my own curriculum, and my own testing requirements. It took a couple of years in the classroom and several interactions with tenured teachers to realize that students need to see connections in the material in different classrooms in order to be well-rounded learners. From a teaching perspective, understanding this connectivity can often lead to better classroom content, more engaged students, and an understanding that you are not alone in teaching the next generation of scientists, teachers, doctors, engineers, and entrepreneurs. In fact, these subjects should be and can be interconnected. Math, for example, can enhance students' abilities in written and oral communication skills, and language arts can increase their ability to communicate their understanding for content-specific reasons. Albert Einstein can be quoted as saying, "Mathematics, in its own way, is the poetry of logical ideas." This quote reminded me that math, in itself, really is a language, and that if you can make this connection and view yourself as skilled in language arts, you also have the capacity to be skilled at math. At the core, these subjects should not be treated separately, but as companions to one another, building off the skills gained in each subject. To be lifelong learners capable of fulfilling the future's in-demand jobs, students need to experience, understand, and apply these connections in the classroom. As core subjects, math and language arts are often viewed as standalones. Based on the diagram, however, we can begin to see some conceptual overlap. In the math circle, we know that students are asked to make sense of problems and work to solve them through numbers. They learn to reason abstractly and use precision, and they look for and make use of repetition and reasoning. In the language arts circle, we know that students build and present knowledge through research by integrating, comparing, and synthesizing ideas. They also come to understand others' perspectives through reading, listening, and collaborations. It is the circle in the middle, however, that include ideas that can be looked at from both the math circle and the language arts circle. In between, we know that students construct valid arguments from evidence and sound reasoning. They look for and make use of structure. They read, write, and speak grounded in evidence, and they build a strong base of knowledge through these content connections. Subject integration is an effective way to tap into students' skills and abilities and increase their engagement by making use of many different learning styles. The integration of math and language arts can easily lend itself to the use and application of multiple learning styles and thinking strategies, and can build a foundation for students' future success as job seekers. Language arts encompasses more than grammar and literature. It is how we communicate and solve problems by expressing ourselves in the best language possible, even if that language takes the shape of an algorithm. Math is more than numbers and equations. It is, in fact, its own written language. In short, by integrating best practices across multiple subjects, we can build a culture of well-rounded, well-educated students who are prepared for the future's high demand and highly technical jobs. Techniques to integrate math into language arts class and vice versa can involve anything from simple class routines to more complex class subjects. The following are some ideas that can add a little inspiration and help weave the worlds of the perceived and left and right brain thinker together. Since this is in fact a math summit, I'm going to look at these concepts through the lens of a math classroom. One of the simplest ways to include language arts concepts into a math classroom is by using a journal. While teaching, I worked with a math teacher in a teamed environment who swore by journaling in her classroom. She used this technique each day to start the class to get students focused. Journals can be used as a place to solve various math problems or ask questions about confusing material, but I would like to take this idea one step further. While working at a middle school in North Carolina, I had the pleasure of working with a math teacher who would assign journal prompts that required students to compose math story problems. Because we worked in a team environment, we were able to use this not only to gauge our students' math understanding, but we worked together to include this as a formal language arts writing assignment. To give a solid working example, this slide demonstrates a simple math problem story prompt. Miss Smith, the math teacher, would give students this story at the beginning of class. Emma and Abby have been saving pennies. Emma has 232 pennies and Abby has 151 pennies. How many more pennies does Emma have than Abby? Simple concept. A day or two before the prompt was delivered in math class, I would review the components of a well-written story in language arts class. These concepts included identifying such things as the story's character, the story's setting if present, the story's plot, and the story's theme. Students would then apply these concepts to the math story problem. So looking at it from a language arts perspective, we would say, who are the characters? The characters are Emma and Abby. Is there a setting? Is that setting important? We know from this example, there is no setting and it is not important. The plot, the what. Emma and Abby have both been saving pennies, and Emma has 132, while Abby has 151. We want to know how many more pennies does Emma have than Abby? The theme, the why, or the so what of the story. We know that students need to compare the number of pennies between Emma and Abby. Finally, students are asked to do the mathematical calculations. They know that they have to subtract to find the difference. 232 minus 151 equals 81. Therefore, the answer is B. After some revisions and editing time, students complete final drafts of their math story prompt and then exchange them with peers to solve the equations. Once solved, final drafts were then submitted to both Mrs. Smith and myself for a math grade and a corresponding language arts grade. Another example is the ROAR concept. We all know that in order for our students to do well on English language arts assessments, including many standardized tests, students need to know how to paraphrase. Since the math story problems are short, they are ideal practice for paraphrasing. Paraphrasing will also help students solve math story problems because students will learn to focus on the nature of the problem rather than just on the numbers in the story. A sixth grade teacher here in Western Pennsylvania recommending using ROAR, a graphic organizer, to solve problem stories. The next slide provides an example of this graphic organizer in practice. So the math story problem. Lexi's apartment building has 8 apartments on each floor. There are 9 floors in the building. What is the total number of apartments in Lexi's apartment building? Students will then apply the ROAR acronym. First, the R and the R, read and restate. What are we reading and restating? Students would write, Lexi lives in an apartment building that has 9 floors and 8 apartments per floor. We would move on to the O. What is the strategy that the student will use to solve this problem? And you can see based on the slide, there are lots of strategies. Normally, the teacher asks students to circle one, and they get to self-select. So students can draw a picture, find a pattern, make a table, or create an equation. Based on the work through the organization strategy, students then choose an operation. This is the math piece. Are you going to add, subtract, multiply, or divide in order to find your answer? Finally, the A in ROAR is to answer the problem, ensuring that students show their work and how they got to the end result. Finally, what we view as the hardest step for students is the last R and R, the reread and rework, read it again. In this case, students go back to the original problem, they highlight keywords, and make sure that their calculations are correct. Journaling with problem stories and ROAR are 2 examples. I wanted to provide one final example that takes this concept of integrating subject concepts one step further. A 7th grade social studies teacher at a Pennsylvania cyber charter school uses this project to demonstrate skills across all subjects. While learning about world history, students were tasked with completing a travel brochure for one country of their choosing. Students had to identify their country and were asked to write about why they chose this location, including providing a brief snapshot of the country's highlights, such as a little history, the country's climate, their food, and their culture. This part of the project included language arts concepts. Next, students are asked to create a detailed vacation budget, spending no more than $2,000 for a 4-day trip. Flight was included, but each student's $2,000 had to account for things like hotel, food, travel within the country, admission to activities, and souvenirs. This had to be shown in a detailed daily expense chart, or the mathematical portion of this project. Pictures with at least 1 paragraph explanation also had to be included to complete the assignment. Here, we can once again see language arts, but we also begin to see some art concepts being used. Through this project, students creatively combine content knowledge from several subjects to reach the ultimate goal of learning about another country. These examples bring us to the why. Why is integrating subject content so important? Well, the proof is in the data. Our current national education policy aims to increase the number of qualified candidates for highly technical positions and shrink the educational gaps of college graduates entering the workforce. Education reformers, ed tech startups, and nonprofit have spent years focusing on educating the population in science, technology, engineering, and math, or STEM as we know it in the classroom. To add to this, data suggests that between 2017 and 2029, we can anticipate the number of STEM jobs will grow at an 8% higher rate than non-STEM related positions. These include positions in computing, engineering, and advanced manufacturing who are leading the way. In the next 10 years, the Bureau of Labor and Statistics estimates that there will be over 821,000 STEM job openings in the United States. But why bring up STEM? We know that math is being highlighted, but we are missing the language arts piece. Why is STEM data important to our conversation? The Department of Education recently invested $540 million in STEM education. Along with these funding, we know that STEM education helps prepare our students for the future by teaching them new technologies and innovations. This not only gives them a competitive edge in the job market, but it also helps them to understand and participate in shaping the world around them. Science has proven that honing literacy skills directly affects mathematical skills. This fact should not be ignored. Instead, this idea should be explored even further to ensure that our students are ready and able to work and eventually lead in these high demand, highly technical fields. Although science, technology, engineering, and math are specifically called out, we must remember that without the language arts portion or the effective communication piece, students will not be prepared for what we know is the changing labor market. Taking this idea one step further, it is my pleasure to introduce Sam Bussard. Sam is going to provide a snapshot of current job openings, highlighting specific skills we are seeing employers require in their potential candidates. Sam, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Melissa. As Melissa mentioned, my name is Sam Bussard. I am the Director of Talent Strategy for Compass Business Solutions. Compass is a consulting firm that specializes in organizational performance and people operations based in Pittsburgh, with office locations in Los Angeles and in the Florida markets as well. Compass is a partner to the ARM Institute for HR and people operations, and I'm very excited to be here today. Before I dive into the content, I want to talk a little bit about my background and what qualifies me to share some information on this topic. I've spent the last 10 years in talent acquisition space, strategically and tactically, across a variety of industries, including and specializing in engineering, technology, management consulting, professional services, and many more. I've personally been responsible for over 1,000 hires in the space over the last 10 years, and I come from education myself. My undergraduate degree is in Spanish literature and language with a minor in K-12 education. Though I pursued a different path after the education undergrad work that I did, I'm a strong believer that the workforce benefits from the topic of subject integration that we're talking about today. So let's dig in. As we start into the presentation, the first thing I want to level set on is what language arts and math really look like in a job description. So when we are looking at open roles in the market, here are a list of some different things that you may see that would represent language arts and math. And right, you notice that it's not just words and number skills. We're talking about reading comprehension, writing skills, verbal communication skills, presentation skills, customer service skills, editing skills, analytical skills, engineering skills, data collection and analysis skills, financial analysis skills, and even operational skills. And we're seeing words that are very, very common. And if we advance to the next slide, the market is telling us that those skills are colliding. So if I were to go onto LinkedIn today, right, and do a simple search, LinkedIn would tell me that there are nearly 5 million jobs posted today. Of those 5 million jobs, approximately 500,000 of them list essential job requirements of both strong analytical skills and strong written or verbal communication skills, further influencing the idea that subject integration between language arts and math is critical in the workforce and the workforce to come. What else are we seeing? Employers are seeking candidates and employees who can communicate the data, what the data in their role tells them to drive greater business impact. Long gone are the days where we're talking about roles that live within a four-wall box and don't have to cross-functionally collaborate or be able to interpret analytical data and put it into business terms. And that's the third point. Cross-functional and interdepartmental collaboration are becoming non-negotiables in organizations, particularly when budgets are lean. And we're hearing hiring managers talk about this all the time when we calibrate on new opportunities. More and more, we're looking for folks who can work across the aisle, who can communicate, who can drive business impact, and can analyze the data in order to ensure future effectiveness. We'd be remiss today to not talk about one other large component in the market space, and that's the influence of AI. Go to the next slide. AI is going to influence how we work and the skills that are needed for career success across industries. There may be some conceptions, right, that AI is going to replace some of those skills in terms of, analytical skills or written skills or the integration of some of these topics. What we're seeing now is that some roles and tasks may ultimately be automated and may not be strong enough of a word, right? They will be. But the automation will need to be monitored and need to be checked for quality, for logic, and domain practicality. So then what does that mean for the workforce and the type of talent that we're going to look for going forward? Well, the focus is going to shift to comprehension and analysis skills around what tasks the AI was able to complete and validating that what the AI was able to produce is correct, appropriate for the organization, on theme, on brand, sounds right, palatable to the ear, and all of the components that an AI experience would not be able to replace the human element. So what does that mean then in terms of real world examples in the job market? Here I list 5 roles, right? And if we look at these 5 role titles, they look dramatically different, right? Customer service agent, AI engineer, a recruiter, a management consultant, and we bring in the entrepreneur as well. I want to talk about some examples in each of these job descriptions that I've hired for recently or worked with clients on within my client basis regarding how the integration of language arts and math are colliding in real world example. The first one is the customer service agent. So we're going back to that example about AI, right? And in our customer service agent example where I was hiring for, we were looking for somebody who possessed very strong written skills because this was a mostly digital opportunity, as many roles have become in the post-COVID world. In this example, we were looking to be able to assess the writing capabilities of the candidates in this role. And so we proctored an assessment. The assessment response that we got in return, we felt pretty confident that we had gotten an AI generated or ChatGPT or other response back. And it brought on a really strong conversation amongst the hiring team. And we said, are we okay with this? And at first, right, our initial reaction was to say, no, we're not okay with this. We're hiring for writing skills. We need, that capability to be built in. We can't have AI support that. And then we thought a little bit more and went through the process. And then we started to have the dialogue around, well, maybe we are okay with that. And that changes then how we're looking to staff this role and the skills that we need to have someone be successful. And what we really need is a customer service agent who, if they are going to use a ChatGPT or another AI source like that, has the ability to analyze the data, to determine the voices appropriate for the organization, to ensure that the information flows and makes sense in logical patterns and is palatable back to the person that will receive it. Sound familiar? That was a great example of subject integration in the workforce. The next example was an AI engineer, right? So we're talking about this idea of AI. And what we were looking for was a very specific skill set that we needed someone to be able to be technical enough to help us with workflows and to help us understand what we could do from a technical perspective with the AI technology that is and will be available to us. And we also needed someone to understand and be able to communicate across to business stakeholders of what impacts that type of technology and those types of patterns and analytical resources will have to their work. And I'll share that we initially, when we were looking for this role, had a pool of about 500 candidates. And as soon as we introduced the concept that we were looking for someone to both be technical and have that analytical background and to possess those strong language arts skills to be able to cross-functionally communicate across the business, our pool decreased to approximately 10% of the initial size. 10%. That's staggering. And it's also a real topic of conversation around the idea of subject integration. The next example, right, is particular to my domain, a recruiter. And, you may ask, how would a recruiter be looked at to have analytical skills as part of their day-to-day role or math skills? Well, when I ask my recruiters to be efficient and they're carrying different opportunities that they're looking to fill for, whether it's, different clients or in the past, one company, one of the things I ask them to do is to understand what their funnel looks like in terms of how many people they talk to, how many people are a good fit for a role, and then how many people we interview and how many we ultimately make an offer to. And so I ask them to analyze their own analytics to understand, how much time do I need to spend in order to be successful and get my job done? And we know that the language arts skills are super important for a recruiter because, well, a recruiter would likely not be very successful if they weren't spending a lot of time communicating on the phone effectively. The fourth example is around a management consultant, right? A little bit more general, but I think that this is something that is coming to light with the younger generations and the interests that they have in exploring different skill sets. In the management consultant role, very similarly to what we've explained in the first three examples, we're looking for folks who have the ability to not only do your tactical tasks, right, and analyze data sets and solve problems, but we're also then looking for folks who have the ability to translate those items and that information in a digestible and tangible way to business stakeholders. Once again, strong piece of subject integration there. The last piece I bring up is around the potential opportunity of being an entrepreneur, right? In the world of advancing technology, things are moving at paces that we've never seen them in before. And we go back to the AI example, right? We're seeing versions of AI being produced in ways that we've never seen before. 6 months before they were obsolete or didn't exist, and 6 months later they may be obsolete. We're talking about a time of startup culture and entrepreneurship. In those types of roles, it is very common that you're going to be asked to wear many hats. And many times those many hats are going to be around the topic of subject integration, where again, you're going to have business side responsibilities as well as analytical responsibilities, whether it's within data, patterning, and communicating that back. It could be financial or operational. In that environment, right, all bets are off and there is a lot to explore and a lot to learn, but it also really bodes well to the idea of subject integration and expressing that as important for the future. So in general, right, we're seeing so much need for the subject integration in our real world examples in the job market. The roles are asking for it. The clients and the organizations who are hiring that I work with and that others are working with are asking for it. And it's the way that we are evolving as a society in order for us to be able to continue to successfully communicate and successfully work. That ends our presentation today. I hope you've enjoyed. And from Melissa and I, thank you so much for joining. It is a quiet group, not a question, but I'll read a comment out of the chat, which I think is relevant to this, around the idea that something like this increases collaboration and cooperation between educators and also various content areas. And I think that exists in a few different places, right? Not only just different subject matter expert educators with different peers who teach in different subject areas. But I think it's really important to call out that the collaboration and cooperation between the education field and the educators and the, organizations like ARM and others, that is going to continue to be really critical as we continue to progress as a society. So I think that's a great call out.
Yeah, I think from an ARM perspective, we're seeing it more and more. And I know many of you are educators in this classroom, and once an educator, always an educator. So despite the fact that I am not a classroom teacher currently, I feel like you're kind of born into it. And I fell into ARM, but we're seeing more and more the conversation around the connect between our education system, including our trainers, if you want to look at it past K to 12, and employers. And if there is any gaps there, are our training providers and our educators giving our students, giving our kids what they need in order to match those jobs and those skills that employers are looking for? So looking through it, ARM is spending some time looking through it through both lenses to kind of make sure that everybody is aligned and to begin to create that pipeline for our students who are interested, particularly in advanced manufacturing and robotics, where the ARM Institute sits. Hopefully the examples, I had to kind of rack my brain from an educator side and call on some of my best educator friend teachers to go, okay, how do you use this in your classroom? How do we start to add content? So hopefully those at least got the creative juices flowing as you start to kind of adopt some of these practices.
Ooh. Here's a question, Melissa, and I think this would maybe be fielded for you. Are there other resources that are available to help with integration, as you just touched on?
Well, I think it's most important to, it's an interesting question. I think it's probably most important to lean onto your subject matter experts in the classroom. When I was teaching, I had we team taught, which I know we don't do that a whole lot here in Western Pennsylvania. I was teaching in North Carolina. So it was an interesting, I was teamed with a teacher who taught social studies and science and a teacher that taught math. We had the same 75 students in rotation. So it was super easy to begin integrating these subjects because we talked. We talked about, we talked about our kids. We talked about, hey, Sammy's a real problem in my classroom. Is he a problem in your classroom? Well, why is he a problem in my classroom? And as we started to create those bonds, it was a natural progression to go, okay, well, let's roll some of these math, language arts, science, social studies concepts and kind of really truly make it a teamed environment and wrap those ideas around our kids. So I think probably your best resource are the teachers that are across the hall from you or down the hall from you that teach those different subjects. A lot of times I was a language arts teacher, you kind of feel segmented into what you do and particularly what your standardized tests look like, that we forget that teachers down the hall that are teaching math, social studies, science, even art are going kind of through the same thing you are. So leaning in and finding those teachers who want to cooperate and share ideas is probably your best resource. I will say, as I was working through this presentation, there are some great online resources. There are some nonprofits that are really looking into this concept of integration and how we look at students as individuals and kind of what they need to progress them from one point to the other. I sat in a conversation last week with a team of teachers from North Dakota who are taking this one step further. And really kind of looking at the school day isn't not just a bell and our kids sit in a seat and we talk at them all day. That works for some students and doesn't work for other students. So how do we start looking at this from a much higher, what's the word I'm looking for? A much higher lens of, well, what does this student need versus this student? And how do we create an environment for both those students to see success? That was a lot of information. I hope I answered that question. I was on a soapbox.
That was a great soapbox. Thanks, Melissa. I have another comment too. And Melissa, I'll start this and see if you have anything to add here just about, the interest in bringing in the AI topic into this conversation. I think, we'd be remiss to not talk about it at this point. Again, going back to some of the things we were talking about in the presentation, 6 months ago, we may not have been thinking about it. We're thinking about it today, and it's going to be completely different 6 months from now. And who knows where it's going to end up by the time, from the audience of this presentation of 4 through 8 grade. Who knows where we'll be from an AI and technology perspective by the time, that body of students is entering the workforce. But I think the big piece that I come back to here is that AI will be a fabulous tool for us in the future. It will never be able to replace what's in here, of the human experience and the element. And there are just things that we're going to need to be able to work with that type of technology. And that may happen more and more. And it's going to be around things like being able to verbalize and communicate what the AI is telling us, being able to understand how the AI, got to certain patterns to be able to make certain assumptions. And, if you're using that technology today, sometimes it's great and sometimes it's wrong, Sometimes it will give you information that is just not what you're looking for. And so there's also got to be that logical side of thinking through, is what I'm looking at reasonable, logical, and correct. So there's going to be this whole new dimension that's introducing now, and it's going to continue into the future from that AI and machine learning perspective.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, Sam, we have a lot of conversations at ARM around AI. We have a lot of conversations with employers who are using AI. And one thing that kind of stopped me in my tracks last week as a mom of a 14-year-old daughter is our kids are way more comfortable in the AI space than probably my generation is, because they're already using it every day. And we kind of don't even realize they're using it every day. So to say, employers are like, these new concepts, they're really not new concepts to our kids. So how are we, as educators and parents, kind of creating a balance between what they already kind of innately know because they've grown up with computers and phones in their hands and have these AI interactions? How do we bridge that gap between what employers need? And in some ways, employers are actually a little behind where our kids are in terms of technology. So creating that pipeline, creating that progression, bridging those gaps will be key, particularly as educators and parents, for our kids in the future as technology continues to evolve. And our kids really are at the front line of that.
Yeah, Melissa, that's a really great call out that you make as well, that in a lot of ways, this group of students that have had this interaction with AI from a young age will be the conduits in the job market in the years to come, right? Because this is, to what you were saying, second nature to them. This makes a lot of sense, right? They are going to be, some of the folks who are training others who didn't have that, innate firsthand experience for their entire lives. And so there's a lot of value in looking at that as, an opportunity to really hone those skills. And back to the integration piece, right? Make sure that you're a really strong communicator to help other folks understand how to use that type of technology.
Absolutely. Nothing quite humbles you like a 14-year-old looking at you and rolling her eyes and saying, well, yeah, mom. But we are kind of seeing that from a job market standpoint. They're ahead of us. And it'll be interesting to see how that kind of evolves as a workplace, as an ecosystem, as a workforce ecosystem, when these new ideas are introduced, and how quickly we adjust to that as a workforce. Agreed. I see the comment that we have to know if AI is giving us valid info or if it's biased. Absolutely right. Just like all things technology-based, internet-based, giving our students the knowledge to be able to critically think through those issues and go, is this correct or is this not correct? And does this make sense or doesn't this make sense? And then what to do based on looking at the data that AI is kind of giving you. So all keys, and that brings in both the technical, mathematical, science concepts and the language arts concepts. I don't think neither of those things are going away. Mm-hmm. I think you can't have one without the other. You need the math piece of it because, like it or not, we are looking at a technical world. We are looking at even, technology and touchscreens and manufacturing processes. So that's all kind of that science, technical, math related. But you need the language arts in order to continue to communicate, particularly as we moved into the environment of hybrid. I spend more time emailing than I do anything else. So if you can't get your ideas into a concise email and be able to share that with other people, you're kind of missing the boat. So I think, we're right there.
Yeah.
God, I set an alarm. I think we're on the cusp of that, but thank you so much for joining us. We hope we gave you some great ideas. We hope we gave you some great examples that you can take back to your classrooms and get your creative juices flowing as you guys are on the front lines of educating the next American workforce. So thank you.
Thank you.